it looks like we are headed towards another year where this is Jim Harbaugh's no-star defense. Will start in the trenches, as everything does with the Michigan Wolverines. And I guess we can loop the tackles and the edge guys into the same mix here. But to me, I think that the most interesting conversation about this defensive line is at that edge rusher position. You lose a couple guys from last year. Taylor Upshaw transferred out. Mike Morris is in the NFL now. Yabioki transferred as well to play for Biff Poggi at Charlotte. So you kind of have, I think there are four guys to the top. It's pretty clear that there are four. It's Braden McGregor, it's Jalen Harrell, it's Josiah Stewart, and it is Derek Moore. To me, I don't know that it really matters who winds up being the quote-unquote starter here. I think what is probably more important is the guys that are pinning their ears back in the fourth quarter when you need to seal a game or when the game's on the line and you need to stop. But we'll start with the edge guys first. I mean, how do you feel about this group? And I think the biggest question to me is, are they better than last year's group?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I thought Mike Morris was pretty darn good last year. And he if he was a little bit healthier at the end of last season, I think they would have had a better pass rush. But this is another position too where a guy could completely emerge as well. We were not talking about David Ojabo, for example, 2 years ago heading in to fall camp, but then he emerges as a guy who played about over half the snaps, ends up with double-digit sacks, and you're talking all about Ojabo, after the Ohio State game. So there's a big group there. Those four are clearly on top, as Jim Harbaugh said last week, the guys that you mentioned. But who's going to emerge as the very good or elite guys that can get after the passer, that can, stop the run as well from the edge spot? I'll be watching that. I know I've been, a guy throughout the offseason that's talked a lot about how I think Michigan needs to make strides with its pass rush. That comes on the interior as well. And it's kind of the same question I have there for Chris Jenkins as I did for J.J. McCarthy. Is he going to be a first rounder? As Jim Harbaugh said to Bruce Feldman, watch him become a top 10 pick. He's an absolute freak. I don't think he needs to be a top 10 pick for Michigan to be really good at that position. But can he be a first rounder like some others are projecting? Can he be a second rounder? Can he live up to that? That's going to be important. That's also going to help out whoever takes over at nose tackle. I think that's one of the more underrated storylines of this offseason is you're losing an incredible player in Mozzie Smith, first round pick at nose. And he was so good at stopping the run for Michigan in there. Mason Graham's got to be good. Kenneth Grant has to be really good. And then the X factor at really any of those positions on the interior is Rayshon Benny, what kind of strides that he's made. So, I just think there are a lot of names right now, and they're in a pretty good spot with that. But who's going to emerge as the guys who demand the bulk of those snaps? Harbaugh talked about rotating. Two guys will start on the edge one week, and maybe two will start on the edge the next week until they figure out who those top guys are. You want to figure out who those top guys are. You want the edge guys to be able to set up moves throughout a game, to be able to get in a rhythm. Something that I think some of these guys lacked in years past, playing behind the Mike Morrises and Aiden Hutchinson. So, to me, it's just you got a great crop of guys right there, some guys that could break out. We're just waiting to see, which 2, 3, or 4 it's going to be.
And of all the position groups that, using that comparison to the quarterback battle from last year, I think the edge guys, this is probably the one that mostly most mirrors that situation. Just because, like I said, I don't know that all these guys could flash and probably will flash in fall camp, and you really won't have much answered because it might just come down to, who plays the best with the lights are the brightest. So for me, I mean, that's fascinating. And also, if you guys are watching on YouTube, shout out to Megan for having the chart pulled up, but this is also the scholarship chart that goes from, so, if you see some names that look a little bit out of order, this isn't a depth chart. It's just more like the scholarship chart, which is helpful for us as well as a visual aid here. I want to talk about that nose tackle job really quick. This is, Mozzie Smith lived and breathed stopping the run. And that's something that, talked to Kenneth Grant a few times this offseason. He talked about how Mozzie tried to pass that on to the younger guys, but now it's Rayshon Benny's time and it's Kenneth Grant's time. And I think Mason Graham probably plays a little bit of nose as well. You know, we know that Chris Jenkins is for the most part. He's put some weight on. He's up to 307 when we talked to him at Big Ten Media Days. I would say he's mostly a known commodity. I think whatever you get from him more than what we know he already is going to be huge for this defensive line. I think he's probably hoping he's a little more twitched up, be a little more impactful from a pass rush perspective. But in terms of these guys that get after it and stop the run, Kenneth Grant's a freak, but he's also a sophomore. And we've seen these guys that have, played defensive line at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. It takes a little bit of time. It took Mozzie Smith 3 years. It took Chris Hinton 3 years. It seemed like Maurice Hurst, we didn't see much of him until later on in his career. So, if I had to pick a guy to be sort of the breakout between him and Rayshon Benny, I'm probably going with Benny because it seems like we've heard a lot about him behind the scenes, not just this spring, but even dating back to fall camp last year.
Yeah, he might be the most improved. I just think for Benny, it's just going to be tough positionally because I feel like he's more in the mold of a Chris Jenkins. He could probably play the nose if he needed to. And, when they go to 3 down linemen, I think he's one of your guys that you would put in there. But I just think positionally, we're going to see a Mason Graham probably get the most snaps out of those 3 between Benny, Grant, and Graham. And he's got big shoes to fill, as we said, with Mozzie leaving there. I mean, he was very good as a freshman last season, but how much better is he going to be? Because it's one thing to play 20 snaps a game. It's another thing to play, 75, snaps a game. And Mozzie Smith hardly came out, and he was fantastic despite being at that size, having that conditioning. So it's a whole different beast. And, I think they need a couple guys in there to raise their level of game, because it's really important to stop the run, not have to commit too many resources, and then rush the passer when it's time to do that as well.
Yeah. So any other storylines with these 2 position groups? I know we're running low a little. I mean, we'll stay as long as we need to, but I have a couple other groups to get to. Just anything else on your mind with the defensive linemen?
No.
Let's move on to those linebackers then.
LBs.
The LBs. Junior Colson, I think that's a guy that we have locked in there. I would assume that Mike Barrett starts the season next to him, but the depth there is maybe as good as it's ever been, at least in terms of these last 4 or 5 years. You've got you bring in Ernest Hausman, who I think is the guy that has a chance to maybe steal someone's job in camp, and that someone maybe being Michael Barrett. But Jimmy Rolder got some run last year. I know Jaden Hood is a guy that they've liked behind the scenes. Micah Pollard's a guy who's coming along. Who knows? Maybe something happens with Nigel Glover at Northwestern. I know there's a lot of interest there, but this group, it's pretty clear. Who probably starts the season there, and the increased depth and I think athleticism too is what I think has a chance to be a really big asset for this defense.
Yeah, I think there's a clear top 4 at this position as well. Junior Colson, Mike Barrett, Ernest Hausman, and Jimmy Rolder, who, from what we've heard, has been told he's going to kind of be in that mix heading into the season and fall camp. So, now I look at just how much better are these guys. I thought Junior Colson was pretty good last season, but he wasn't a great player. He was also playing hurt with not only a hand or wrist injury, but a foot injury that he got surgery on. We saw him on a scooter in the spring that he had to recover from that. He looks a lot bigger this offseason when we saw him at Wayne State. Also seeing some pictures. He is really, really thick right now. So how that's going to help him remains to be seen. Well, excited to see kind of what the next level is for Junior Colson. I asked him that in the spring. He said next level is to be an All-American. So, he's got the athleticism. He's put on some weight. So I think I'm just excited to see what the next level is for him. And then Mike Barrett, he's a guy that absolutely came on at the end of last season. He had the 2 picks against Rutgers. He has a huge game leading Michigan in tackles against Ohio State. Thought the linebackers were a little underwhelming there in the TCU game in the Fiesta Bowl. So they need to be better this season. I think that's one of the reasons why Chris Partridge is back on Michigan staff. So, what he's going to do with that group, I think can be, I think they can make some market improvement. And then, is Ernest Hausman going to be that X factor, as you kind of talked about? Maybe in fall camp, maybe in the season, he takes over a job. I wouldn't necessarily predict that right now, but he definitely has the license and ability, as Michigan's head coach would say. And then Rolder, I think Jaden Hood took a step in the spring. I think Micah Pollard, he really impressed last year during fall camp. Was a little bit, undersized and probably added some weight at this point. So they got a lot of depth there now. That was not one of their more deep positions last year, and now it is. So, what can Chris Partridge do with this group?
I think it's important to note with Houseman too, is that, yes, he transfers in and he's got that starting experience. So people go, oh my gosh, wow, a plug and play starter at linebacker. He's got the starts in the Big Ten. But I think it's important to remember that, choose my words carefully here. I think he was drinking from the fire hose last year, kind of being thrown into action for that Nebraska team in the dwindling days of the Scott Frost era. I think that he's a guy that I think Michigan, the fact that they brought him in as a true sophomore, I think, speaks to the fact that this isn't, Drake Nugent is a plug and play guy. James Turner at kicker, we'll talk about them in a little bit, a plug and play guy. You've got these guys at, every position that it feels like they brought someone in. I think that they're willing to they're willing to play the long game with Houseman a little bit. And I think at some point, yes, I think we saw it in the spring. I mean, this defense needs guys to be a little more disruptive, a little more athletic, sideline to sideline. And that's, I'm not comparing him to Devin Bush, but I think he's a guy, maybe the closest thing athletically that they've had to that in a while. And I think that this defense needs that. And for him, I mean, it's almost, it's a clean slate. It's a fresh start. Clock almost kind of goes back to zero for him, but he does have that experience. He's already played a really good game in the Big House in his career, playing with the Huskers last year. But for me, I think that they're willing to kind of put him on ice just a little bit. Now, if he goes out and steals a job, I mean, that's great. But again, I could see this being where maybe he just kind of works in and it's later in the year, or maybe even 2024, where he winds up making his biggest impact. But you see it. I mean, the athleticism, the disruption, it was on display the second that we saw him on the field in that spring game. And I guess one last note on Junior Colson as well. I saw him out in the, I forget if it was at a camp or somewhere in Ann Arbor over the summer. And I mean, he looks like one of those edge guys that we just talked about. I mean, he is rocked up. And he's always physically looked the part, but he looks the part of a junior Big Ten linebacker now. And them having a little more depth to kind of take a little bit off of his plate, I think is going to be huge for not just the linebacker group, but also that back seven in general. And that brings us to the secondary now. And I think we'll start with safeties because I don't think there's a whole lot to discuss there. Rod Moore is going to start at one spot. Makari Page is going to start at the other. And in those three safety looks, now that RJ Moten's out, I think you're probably looking at Zeke Berry being that third guy. But any quick thoughts on the safeties, or am I missing something when I say that it looks pretty cut and dry there?
No, I mean, you got a guy in Rod Moore who I think can be one of the bigger breakout stars in all of college football this season. Led Michigan in interceptions last year. I mean, has always been good as a tackler, and he looks way bigger as well. He was telling me, that I think he's close to 190 at this point. There was a picture of him. He switched to jersey number 9, and just he almost looked like an edge guy. I think someone replied to my tweet with the photo of him last week, saying he could play edge rusher for Michigan. Obviously not that big, but man, he's rocked up as well. And he's always been that guy that was able to hang, in the run game, and is just a great form tackler and has great instincts. But now that he's got a little bit more pop to him, I think that is going to help Michigan as he moves around the defensive backfield. Quentin Johnson is another name I think that would be right there for that kind of third safety. So they got a little bit of depth there. There's a reason why RJ Moten transferred. I think he saw the writing on the wall. But yeah, I think it's storylines galore over at corner and nickel, which is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say don't sleep on Keon Saab. That would be the one thing I would add. I think you're going to see him mix in a little bit more as well. Kind of reminds me of a slightly more athletic Brad Hawkins, just like knowing the little bit that we did about him coming out of high school. Didn't see a ton of him last year, but I think he's more kind of that box safety. Whereas
both Jersey guys. Yeah,
that's right. Whereas Zeke Berry, I think, is a guy that, again, we'll talk. His name is going to come up when we talk nickel here in a few minutes. But I like that it goes hand in hand with the corners. But it feels like they have a really nice combination of of depth and versatility here. I think they can mix and match really well with the corners and safeties and the guys that play the nickel. But let's talk about probably the biggest storyline on this team in the here and now, and that is that cornerback position. Will Johnson is, five-star guy, comes in last year, and honestly, it was kind of like the dimmer switch with him. He starts out just mixing in, and by the end of the year, I thought he was probably Michigan's best corner. Maybe not number one with a bullet, but I thought he was their best cornerback when last season ended. I think the hype was legitimate and justified with him. He's got the length. He's got the athleticism. He's played, he played a little bit of wide receiver in high school. So he's got that ball hawk and playmaking ability and that the license and the ability, so to speak, to rephrase the Jim Harbaugh quote. But that number 2 job right now, again, we talk about concerns or is it a concern or is it a question mark? Right now, I'd say it's a question mark who starts on the other side of him. I think they have guys that if the development comes along, if Steve Klingscale, has is able to unlock something, they have a really, again, talk about the combination of athleticism, all the skills you need to play that position. Amorian Walker, if he can be a little, develop a little more contact courage, and also the ability to put the bad plays behind him, because that's what puts you a cut above at that position. You're gonna get burned at some point, especially if you play the Ohio State Buckeyes. Like, they're gonna get you. Like it happens to everyone. It's the ability to compartmentalize the mistakes, put them in the past, and move forward. I think for me with Amorian Walker, that's the biggest thing with him. It's clear that all of the athletic traits are there, but that might be one that takes a little bit of time. And Jim Harbaugh considers him a starter, but it's more, again, there's about 40 guys on this team that he thinks are starting caliber. And when we saw Amorian Walker in the spring, it was not pretty. He got cooked by Peyton O'Leary, who we didn't really talk about him much at wide receiver, but that's a guy that could crack the rotation there. But still maybe your number 4 receiver, all things considered. So there's a lot of work that's needed there. Josh Wallace comes in from UMass. He's going to fit right into that battle. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one that winds up winning it. Jaden McBurrows is that third guy. I thought we'd hear a little more about Miles Pollard, and maybe we will throughout fall camp. But those are kind of the 3 guys in the mix for this job heading into fall camp. And again, Clayton, I don't know if you agree or disagree, whatever it is. To me, this is number 1 in terms of biggest question marks on this team.
Yeah, I would still. To me, it's a couple rungs down the list. I would say pass rush on defense, but for me, looking at the corners, like, I want to know how healthy Will Johnson's going to be, when he's going to be fully healthy as well. He has said that he may not play that much the first couple games. I don't know what exactly that means. I think it's quite clear at this point that maybe the minor knee scope that he told us about was a little bit more than minor, and also not quite sure if there is such a thing as a minor knee scope. Now, I think he's going to be fully healthy at some point, and that'll be big for Michigan. And maybe if he plays less or doesn't play at all in the first couple games, that'll give some of those guys competing for the other job some more snaps and the more opportunity to earn that job. But also, you got to factor in Mike Sainristil still. He said he's going to play on the outside as well. And does that mean they feel good about Jaden McBurrows maybe, as the slot corner, a little, good enough to take one of the most important positions on this team and move him outside? I don't love the idea of Mike Sainristil still, being 2 years into being a defensive back and at his size on the outside. But, you got to do what's best for the team. And if another guy doesn't emerge out there, then you may have to do that. So I'll just be watching how they piece this together. Guys cross-train under Steve Klingscale at all sorts of different positions back there. So, they're going to be ready for whatever they need to do. But, yeah, it's when's Will Johnson going to be healthy, and how does Steve Klingscale, who's also going to develop these guys throughout fall camp, they're all going to, become better players over the next month. But how does he kind of piece together nickel, corner, and whether that's a combination based on situation as well, how that develops throughout the season. But there's definitely a lot to watch back there, at those 2 positions.
Yeah, if there's any doubt that Will Johnson is not 100% when the season starts, I mean, put him on ice until he is needed or until he's ready to truly play and be as close to 100% as he can. He is the type of guy where if he is healthy and he is playing as well as we think he can, because there is so much more growth that he can do as well. they use the term take away half the field, but really what he does is, if you have one guy locked down, if it's just a one-on-one matchup, I mean, just think of it from this perspective. I mean, you want him healthy when you play Marvin Harrison Jr. on that last Saturday in November. But he's the type of guy that just takes so much pressure off of the back end of that defense. And that's why, I'm not worried about, if he's healthy, whoever's that number 2 cornerback, Will Johnson is going to take so much pressure off of that guy or off of that secondary in general, to where if you need to scheme something up to kind of offset what might be a weakness or a guy that's not quite ready yet, I have confidence that they'll be able to do that. But I also think there's a really quality number 2 cornerback here somewhere. Josh Wallace has played a lot of football. Jaden McBurrows hasn't been healthy, but he is someone who I feel like we've been talking to guys for a couple of years, after practice, before practice, and you ask some of these wide receivers who their most difficult cover on the team is. Jaden McBurrows will come up and hit you, and he will give you, when he's healthy, he's giving these guys a lot of fits behind the scenes. And I like when your corners are able to come up and tackle too. Saw him make a nice hit in the spring game, and again, it's one play, but again, if we're planting flags here on July 31st on who starts 33 days from now, I like Jaden McBurrows a lot, but Josh Wallace came here for a chance to play. He came here because he felt he could probably slide in and play right away. And at worst, I think that you have a guy that will give you some really quality depth there. But I don't think things are as dire as they look here. It's just a matter of finding out who that guy is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I got Josh Wallace, Will Johnson if he's healthy, and then Mike Sainer still as the nickel. I think that's probably what it's going to be to start the year. Again, the big question mark there being Will Johnson's health, but there are some options there that they have to work with at corner. It's just a matter of who plays the best over the next month. And then once they're in those game situations, if a guy's getting burned against, some of these teams early in the year, like against Bowling Green, you probably have a couple other capable players you could put in, and we could see that too. But I think they got enough options here.
Let's move to special teams really quick, and then probably, sorry for the question, people. I think we'll probably wrap up after special teams.
We can rapid fire them. We got some good ones.
We can rapid fire. We have a few, but we won't keep you guys super long after we get through special teams. But, kicker, James Turner was brought in from Louisville to kind of be that guy. I would have him in front right now. Adam Samaha is just going to be getting his kicks, no pun intended, in as fall camp starts. So he's going to be in that mix as well. Tommy Doman, I think Michigan wants him to solely focus on the punting duties. To me, the biggest question with this special teams group is those return jobs and who winds up taking care of those. AJ Henning, I thought, did a fine job, but he is no longer with the program. So, Clayton, any thoughts on who we could see at these 2 returner jobs?
Yeah, I'm intrigued about Roman Wilson again, probably hanging on to the kick returner job and then maybe being the punt returner. I think you could see a guy like Iman Dennis or Tyler Morris, maybe even Donovan Edwards at punt returner. But that's kind of a wide open one. I think that's probably the most wide open position on the entire team heading into fall camp. So a lot of options, just need to see who emerges. But kicker, I feel good about James Turner. I mean, he could be one of the top kickers in the Big Ten, maybe the country this season. I was looking at his stats again today. I mean, he's only missed, I think, 1 or 2 extra points in his career, but he's 32 for 33 from inside 40 yards. That's huge to be able to, feel good about your kicker inside 40. He's made 14 kicks of 40 plus. Jake Moody set Michigan's program record in his career in more games, 4 more games than James Turner, with 17 kicks of 40 plus. So he's right there after 4 seasons at Louisville. It's going to be different, and Michigan may ask him to do more. And Michigan, Jim Harbaugh loves his kickers and leans on them a lot. But I think James Turner can be pretty good there. So I'm excited to see how they feel about him coming out of camp. And then you don't really know when it comes to kicker until, the lights are on. And then Tommy Doman. Jim Harbaugh said he could be a special talent at punter. So I think that's going to be an upgrade, frankly, from what Brad Robbins was last year. So I feel a lot better about Michigan special teams than I did when it was in the spring and Tommy Doman was doing just about everything. Maybe he was probably even holding for his own field goals at that point. But the James Turner edition was big. And I think, Michigan has more than enough here at special teams. And William Wagner was named to the Long Snapper of the Year award watch list. I don't know what it's called, but he is, should be back healthy and ready to go as well after suffering a knee injury at Iowa last year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the special teams right now is the fact that you've had Jake Moody and Brad Robbins basically running their own practices for the last few years. And, Tommy Doman has kind of been in both of their hip pockets. So it's weird to think that we haven't really seen him on the field, but I think he's by far kind of the elder statesman in that room, at least in terms of like knowing how Jay Harbaugh does business, knowing the charting of the kicks and the things they do to keep those guys fresh and get their work in. So I'm not really worried about it. It's just, man, I mean, when you lose a kicker that winds up being a third-round pick, I mean, the crazy thing about that is it probably wasn't even a reach for a team like the 49ers who, you could just be a kick away from being in the Super Bowl or what have you. But we'll see what happens. Those guys were cut from a different cloth, the way they work together. And it's not a question mark, but it's something that, when you have two guys that are there for 5 years and 6 years respectively, there's naturally going to be some, I don't know if growing pains is the word, but it's going to be a little bit different. So especially when we don't get to talk to them, whenever it is in press conference settings.